And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam. It's been a little bit of a break since were last live, but I've had a lot going on in my life with getting back to school, taking 3 classes this semester, going full time, but we will also still be on College Football with Sam to give you breaking news or to reflect on news that maybe occurred or broke a few days ago, released a few days or even several hours past time where it can be considered breaking news. But we'll be giving you analysis and previews and even some preseason predictions to talk about a lot of these things well before they happen in 2025. Like, the 2025 preseason hasn't quite begun yet. Sometimes I hate it when people say we're already in the preseason. I mean, for many schools, that's the case, but we have a national championship game to talk about. So we're going to be doing that today. Reason we didn't get to it earlier is because I was sick and a bit burned out from everything, but that happens to the best of us. We are going to be also discussing a lot of things relating to Penn State, relating to Miami, Florida. We'll talk a little bit more about Ohio State in just kind of a separate way, discussing their team, kind of looking forward to next year, but also, of course, because there's the national championship game to talk about, we'll do that. And I also want to touch on schools like Nebraska, Michigan, Michigan State, schools that I think in large part either barely met expectations or disappointed this year. And can they improve in 2025? We'll have to figure that out, of course, a few months from now, several months from now, but I think we can start asking questions right now. Also, make sure before we begin to hit the like button, to subscribe to the channel, to hit the notification bell, and just hair's bothering me. See, this is one of the advantages that, let's say, Josh Pate has. There's no annoying hair. There's no haircuts. There's no a gust of wind hits you or you put on a shirt a wrong way and your hair just feels weird and it's all messed up. That's an advantage that Josh Pate has. Of course, there are advantages to having hair, like your head is warm in the winter if it's long enough. But anyway, I want to talk about college football here, and just a gentle reminder to you all, again, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live at 6 p.m. Mondays and Wednesdays, Eastern time, of course. We didn't go live yesterday again because I was sick, but I'm feeling better today, and we'll also be going live tomorrow to talk about things that are to be determined. Before we talk about all these topics here, I want to read the chat, and of course, a gentle reminder for all of you, we will be answering super chats if you have any super chat questions at the end of the show. I'm trying to make it so that we can have Q&A sessions as well, where I can try and get to as many people as possible regardless of super chats. But I like to talk about certain things, a lot of things relating to college football, so super chats just make it easier for me to, answer things, because I know a lot of you have questions, and also my time with school and with this channel and other things are limited. So just those reminders for all of you. Lester Acree told me to wake up, and that's because we started a little late here. But yeah, I finally woke up. Pretty Sarah, love when Sam goes live. Thank you. Alex Wilder, are you going to do NFL playoffs as well? No. Ryan Days Beard, thank you for being a moderator. Love the profile picture. Love the name. It's absolutely hilarious. How are you doing? No mandates. Go blue. Gabriel Carter says, can I get a hi? Hello. Ryan Days Beard says OH. I'll just say IO as to be customary. And people are talking now and engaging. So I think that is the perfect moment to really get started here. And I think first and foremost, talk about the national championship game. We've finally done it. We have finally reached the end of the 2024 college football season. I nearly said the end of the 2025 college football season because college football, as you all know, is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The minute this game ends, the minute the clock hits zero, the 2025 preseason begins. I kid you not. And for many programs individually, not college football fans or analysts, for many programs individually, the 2025 season has been underway for over a month now, particularly for schools that finished with a losing record or who underwent massive roster changes after the regular season concluded. That was not the case for these two teams, though, because they just kept winning and winning and winning and winning. Ohio State and Notre Dame, they beat Tennessee and Indiana respectively in the first round at home. Then in the quarterfinal, they beat Oregon and Georgia in the Rose Bowl and Sugar Bowl. In the semifinal, they beat Texas and Penn State in the Cotton Bowl and Orange Bowl. And now they face off. Ohio State's favored by 8 points to beat Notre Dame in the national championship game in Atlanta. And I am going to give you my thoughts. I'm going to give you my analysis. I am going to give you every little opinion, whether it is the size of a grain of sand or whether it is a take as large as Mount Everest or maybe as hot as Mount Fiji whenever it erupts. I don't care. We're going to talk about this game. But before we do so, I encourage you to do some brief things to help yourself out. Like the video to help us get into the algorithm, and that way our awesome content can reach more people. Share this video around to other football fanatics who will enjoy our show and who therefore can talk about our show and our opinions with you. Also, subscribe to the channel to help us reach 30,000 subscribers and hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new content, when I go live to do play-by-play and color commentary for this game, which again takes place 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, January 20th, and also so that you will get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We won't be going live to do our normal live show that Monday, of course, because the national championship game is taking place, but usually the schedule throughout the rest of the preseason will go Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and other days, if I have time, we'll go live then. If you want to support the channel in any other way, just check out the links in the description or pinned comment where you can find our Discord server, which I advise you join, or our Patreon page, merchandise store, which are great ways to support the channel monetarily. I appreciate you all for watching, and let's resume the fun here and talk about the game that's going to determine the champion of the 2024 season. Who is going to be crowned number one? Who's going to be crowned that to conclude 2024? Well, both of these teams do have a strong argument. And I think that the pathway starts off with Notre Dame's rushing offense against Ohio State's rushing defenses. These are two elite units going up against each other here. Notre Dame had some issues against Penn State on the ground, but I don't fault them for that really at all, because Penn State, much like Ohio State, has elite talent on defense. But I will say Ohio State is better coached on that side of the ball than Penn State is. They're more fundamentally sound. And while I don't think up front they have an alien like Abdul Carter does, Jack Sawyer and Tyleik Williams are pretty close as you can get to Abdul Carter without classifying them quite as aliens. And then they have wonderful linebackers. They have an alien at safety in Caleb Downs. Lathan Ransom's playing like an alien. It's really Notre Dame and their elite players on offense, really in the ground game, which is their specialty, against Ohio State's, I would say, best side of the ball, their defense and safeties, linebackers, and defensive line. Notre Dame's averaging 5.9 yards per carry this year. That's third. They're averaging 210.9 rushing yards per game, which is 12th. And they earn 52.04% of their offensive yards on the ground. And they call running plays 55.28% of the time. Like, their bread and butter is running the football. It's very rare to see a team average more rushing yards per game than passing yards per game and be as successful as Notre Dame is, which is, 14-1 record overall, number one strength of record, a points per play margin, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, of 0.357, which means they're one of the most dominant teams in the country. On an average basis, they blow out whoever they play. And then it's that side of the ball, the rushing offense specifically, and Notre Dame offense that's bolstered by Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, a great offensive line that is dealing with injuries but is very deep, an offense that scores 0.569 points per play, against an Ohio State defense that only gives up 12.2 points per game, 0.190 points per play. They only allow 3.9 opponent yards per play on defense, and they only allow 2.7 yards per carry, which is second, and 90.3 rushing yards per game, which is third. Now, some of that is inflated by Ohio State's insane sack percentage, an 11.06 sack percentage, which is first. I don't like the fact that sack yards are taken away from rushing yards. It's really, I think, disingenuous and manipulative, but all of that set aside, Ohio State's rushing defense is elite, and Notre Dame's rushing offense is elite. So I think that right there is the pathway to determine this game. Can Ohio State shut down the run, or can Notre Dame run over Ohio State a little bit? Another angle to look at this game from is Ohio State's offense, and I would specifically say their passing offense, against Notre Dame's passing defense. Now, people have discussed, I think, the Scarlet and Blue Show, specifically Garrison on the Scarlet and Blue Show, who does a wonderful job. I've had him on the channel. They do wonderful work over there. And also Garrison, he works at the Ohio State channel on the Voice of College Football, so please check him out. He's mentioned before how Ohio State has ran a lot of inside zone in the playoffs, and how they've actually done it fairly well because they've changed up their blocking scheme. And Notre Dame doesn't defend the run all that well. It's just factual. Like, Penn State ran all over them. But what I will say is Penn State has one of the best rushing offenses in the country. It's a rushing offense that I think is much better than Ohio State's, in part because it's statistically better. But more importantly, Penn State does not have anywhere close to the weapons Ohio State does at wide receiver, so people can actually stack the box against Penn State. They know what's coming from Penn State most of the time. It's not the case with Ohio State. Ohio State can basically do whatever it wants, except for power running on third and short. That is something that they have really struggled doing ever since their injuries on the offensive line. I think Ohio State will be able to run better on Notre Dame than, let's say, they did on Texas or Michigan or Penn State in the regular season. But I don't think that is their path to winning the game, or to even winning dominantly, is running the ball, and Notre Dame just can't stop it, because Notre Dame's defense is good. Their linebackers, Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, and they still have players up on the defensive line. And safety Xavier Watts is a lot like Ohio State safeties in a way where he's all over the field and he's really impactful in run defense. I think that a key for either team to win is going to be more so Ohio State's passing offense, which is their bread and butter. Their passing offense has helped their rushing offense open up. It's taken some pressure off of the offensive line, which is much better and more naturally suited to pass block than to run block. Their, tight end G. Scott Jr., for example, he's built more like a wide receiver than he is a tight end. And Ohio State's a very physical team, very physical. And I think something that Ryan Day has learned from is the fact that being physical does not mean running the football and being incredible at running the football. Michigan in 2023 was not incredible at running the football, but they were the most physical team in the country. And Ohio State is one of the most physical teams in the country. Look at how they play defense. Look at how their receivers earn yards after contact, and how Will Howard is able to take hits and what he's willing to do. It's the same thing with Notre Dame. Notre Dame plays a lot of man coverage. They're very good at it. They're good at tackling. Their defense is phenomenally coached, and they have young players stepping up all the time, in part because of good strength and conditioning, good physicality, and also good schematics. This is the side of the matchup that I'm very curious about, because Notre Dame runs a lot of man coverage, and Ohio State hasn't seen a lot of man coverage. But part of the reason Ohio State hasn't seen a lot of man coverage is because if you're not perfect in man coverage and you go man on man with Jeremiah Smith, you're dead. It's the same thing if you run man coverage against Travion Henderson or maybe Quinshon Judkins. You don't do it well, you're dead. Like, seriously. So what changes are made on both sides of the ball? What adjustments, what different type of play calls are used, if any, in this matchup, I'm very curious about. Breaking down these offenses very quickly, I would give Ohio State quarterback easily. I'd lean running back right now, mainly because I don't know how healthy Jeremiah Love is currently. But that's an area where if you want to tell me Notre Dame is the better running back room, I'll hear it. There are 3 running back rooms in America right now that all have an argument to be number 1. It's Ohio State with Henderson and Judkins. It's Notre Dame with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And Penn State with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, who are both back for next year, which is pretty incredible. I kind of wish that Henderson and Judkins could return next year, or that one of them could. Judkins actually has eligibility, but he'll probably go off to the NFL. I'm siding with Ohio State, though, mainly because of Henderson. Henderson hits people. Henderson's physical. Henderson can make things happen through the air and on the ground. He's Ohio State's running back number 1. I think the staff finally figured that out after they realized they couldn't effectively run like a true spread option. They had to go more through the air. And Henderson could be a wide receiver in part if he wanted to. But he's an elite running back, and Judkins is also really good too. Judkins is able to fall forward for a yard or 2 per game, holds on to the ball well, is able to have great vision. And of course, with wide receiver, it's not even close. Ohio State is superior at wide receiver. Any of their starting 3, Smith, Tate, Ibuka, would be number 1 against Notre Dame's roster. Literally any of them, and it's not even close there. What I find fascinating is tackle. I think that is an area that's a push, to be frank. Donovan Jackson's playing like an All-American at offensive tackle. Josh Fryer, I think, is just okay. Maybe good, but he's not a future NFL offensive tackle by any means. You look at Notre Dame, Emil Wagner has been playing pretty well, graded very highly per Pro Football Focus. Abdul Carter was basically killing him every time. Abdul Carter lining up against Emil Wagner, the right tackle. I'm curious to see what Jack Sawyer does against Emil Wagner. I think Carter is a much better pass rusher, better overall edge player, defensive end than Sawyer is. But Sawyer is still really, really good. It's just Carter's an alien. And I would think that Sawyer might be better at stopping the run than Carter, though don't quote me on that. But that's just kind of an intuitive feeling that I have just watching them and remembering their plays. I'm curious to see how Wagner does against Sawyer, is all I'm saying. And Sawyer might have an edge there. Anthony Knapp is not going to be playing in this game. Started as a true freshman, did very well at left tackle. Most true freshmen can immediately step into a role on the offensive line and be great. So it's going to be Tosh Baker or Charles Jagasaw, who's back, who's healthy after he got injured in fall camp. Curious to see who starts there. If Knapp were healthy, I would give Notre Dame tackle, and dare I say it, it might be an easy decision. But having a starter injured before playing these lethal defensive ends and linemen and linebackers that Notre Dame will have to play, that's where I kind of make it a debate. I think Ohio State, with the injuries that Notre Dame has suffered at tackle, might be better at tackle. When I look at tight end, when I look at center, and when I look at guard, I would go the Irish there. Pat Coogan's a great center. Billy Scruth and Rocco Spindler are great guards. And then at tight end, Mitchell Evans is great. Is he like Michael Mayer caliber? I don't think so, but he's viewed right now as about a late day 2, maybe day 3 pick, and I'd say he's pretty darn good. So before we move on to defenses here, let me give you the starting lineups for these offenses. At wide receiver for Ohio State's going to be Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Emeka Egbuka. The O-line will feature Donovan Jackson, Austin Sierreveld or Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola, and Josh Fryer. Tight end will feature G. Scott Jr., Will Howard at quarterback, and then at running back, Henderson and Judkins will split carries there. For Notre Dame, wide receiver will be Bo Collins, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse. For the O-line, it will be Tosh Baker or Charles Jagasaw. At O-line, I always go from left tackle to right tackle. Billy Scruth, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, and Emil Wagner. Mitchell Evans will start at tight end, Riley Leonard will start at quarterback, and Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and Aeneas Williams will split time at running back. Moving on to defense here, I think Ohio State is superior on the D-line, linebacker, and safety. I do think Notre Dame is better at corner, though. This Ohio State defense is better than last year's defense, at stopping the run. I think a lot of that is the fact that they've upgraded at safety and they've upgraded at linebacker. They're also better at getting pressure on the quarterback. I think part of that is that Jim Knowles now has full command of the defense, and the entire defensive line basically started last year, so that much seniority coming back and gaining more experience is huge. But one area where Ohio State has gotten worse than last year, if not much worse, is corner. Safety's improved, linebackers improved, the entirety of the D-line is improved. But corner last year for Ohio State was a pretty good strength. I mean, Jordan Hancock started along with Denzel Burke, and Ohio State's passing defense last year was one of the best, if not the best in the country. I would say that this year it's probably Texas who has the best pass defense, and I think the Cotton Bowl bared that out as the game progressed. So that's why I give Notre Dame corner right there. Is they're more highly rated. They don't have the same issues with penalties. Yes, they occasionally do get burned, but we've seen Ohio State's corners get burned as well. Even with Xavier Watts at safety and Adon Schuler and also Jordan Clark at nickelback, which I typically include with the safeties, even with all that talent and Xavier Watts is an alien, they don't have Caleb Downs. They don't have Lathan Ransom, and they don't have Jordan Hancock. Like, Ohio State has 3 All-American caliber players in the secondary, and all of them are at safety, which is just insane. They clearly have the nation's best safety room. And then on the D-line, they have Howard Cross III, R.J. Oben, Notre Dame does, and Joshua Burnham's been good, and Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, and Jalen Sneed are great at linebacker. But I just think that Ohio State's, Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, and JT Tuimoloau are great on the defensive line. Sonny Styles and Cody Simon are pretty fantastic at linebacker, especially Simon. Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, and Jordan Hancock are awesome in the secondary. Like, this Ohio State defense is phenomenal. It's generational, just like last year's was. The difference is the strengths and weaknesses are a little bit different. They just are. But Jim Knowles has fielded 2 generational defenses in a row, and that's pretty impressive. I mean, he is the best defensive coordinator in the country. The only name I would list ahead of him, perhaps, is Iowa's Phil Parker, but he has not had a good season this year. This only makes what Notre Dame does on defense more impressive, though, because they are right at Ohio State's level in efficiency. They only allow 14.3 points per game, 0.212 points per play. They're top 3 in those areas. They are actually better than Ohio State in red zone scoring attempts allowed per game and opponent yards per point, which I found kind of fascinating. They're better at 3rd down conversion and 4th down conversion defense than Ohio State is. And they also do a better job of forcing turnovers. I think the difference between these two defenses is more Notre Dame's a bit more boom and a bit more bust, a little bit more variation in how they perform, and Ohio State's just more solid. I think a good sense of Ohio State's defense this year is they are perfectly fundamentally sound, and on top of that, they have a lot of NFL talent and a lot of experience, so they don't make mistakes. Like, you just have to be better than they are to beat them. And that sounds simple, but when you have the talent and the coaching that Ohio State does, it's not simple at all, and only very few offenses can move them in one way, or I don't think any offense can move this defense in a variety of ways. It's that good. Some other important factors to note is that Ohio State, I think, is better on the line of scrimmage, mostly because their D-line is that much better than Notre Dame's. Of course, I think the offensive line goes to Notre Dame, and look, I mean, you guys know if you've watched the channel, not a big fan of Justin Fry. People think that means I'm hating on him, but it's not. I mean, there's no way. When your opponents can't run man coverage a whole lot, when they can't send a ton of blitzes because they'll get torched through the air, and when you have wonderful play calling And when you have a quarterback who's mobile and can make really good throws, it makes your O-line look much better than perhaps it is. I mean, think about it with Notre Dame. Notre Dame statistically in rushing offense is way better than OSU, and that makes up for the fact that Ohio State's much better in pass protection statistically. The statistics are equal, pretty much, on an average basis. But then the talent heavily leans OSU. The Pro Football Focus grades by experts heavily lean Notre Dame. And Notre Dame suffered injuries too. Same with Ohio State. And because of how Notre Dame's offense works, their O-line is needed a lot more than Ohio State's is to have success. I mean, they don't have a Jeremiah Smith. They don't have anyone that Ohio State does at wide receiver. They don't have Will Howard. I mean, Will Howard is much better than Riley Leonard objectively as a passer, and he has, I think, similar sack escapability. So even though Notre Dame's better on the offensive line, I think Ohio State's just that much better on the defensive line, and that is a combination of injuries and a combination of the fact that game over game, Ohio State's defensive line has improved. They're very physical. I mean, they're great at getting to the quarterback. They're even better at stopping the run. Special teams goes the way of Notre Dame, and then the blue chip ratio, just straight up roster talent from high school, goes OSU's way. But that's not perfect. So when I factor in the eye test and when I watch these two teams, I still think Ohio State's roster is better than Notre Dame's. It's more well-rounded. It has a higher ceiling. I think it has a higher floor, which again makes the coaching job that Notre Dame has done this year that much more impressive. I mean, guys, this isn't TCU or Washington of last year. The points per play margin and how they've performed against teams at the top says that's not the case. I mean, this is a very dominant football team. You look at football power. For example, football power index. Ohio State's viewed as 27.6 points better than the average college football team. Notre Dame's 25.8 points better. Ohio State is 31.1 points better per the average football team per S&P Plus, and Notre Dame's 25.2 points better than the average college football team, again, per S&P Plus. Both of these teams are top five. Ohio State at this point is unanimously number one, but Notre Dame's anywhere from like number 5 to number 2, depending on what power ratings you look at. And I've been picking against Notre Dame game over game over game over game, and I've been wrong. Why have I been wrong? Because Notre Dame has been the better coach team every game, and against Indiana and Georgia, they were certainly the better team with better rosters. So there's that. When you look at other dominance metrics here, Ohio State outscores their opponents on a play-per-play basis by an average of 0.381 points. That's points per play margin. They're number one in that category. They're one of the most dominant teams in recent memory. Not just this year, in recent memory. And they're the most dominant team of the country this year, consequentially. When you look at Notre Dame, though, they're neck and neck. If Notre Dame beats Ohio State, the analytics will probably bear out that Notre Dame was the most dominant team in the country. Like, they're that close. Their points per play margin is 0.357. In terms of field position, looking at expected points added margin, which is not purely field position, of course, but it's looking at, how many points are you expected to score relative to where you were on the field? So how well are you moving the ball, field position, and all these other factors, not just straight up points per play. Ohio State has a 0.292 EPA margin. Notre Dame's is top 10, though, with a 0.239 EPA margin. When I look at strength of schedule, these teams are pretty close. Obviously, Ohio State's played a tougher schedule, second to Notre Dame's 16th, but they're still pretty close. In terms of efficiency, Ohio State's 1, Notre Dame is 2. And in terms of game control, Ohio State's 1, but Notre Dame is 3rd. So everything says that these teams are pretty close together, and they've had their fair share of bad losses, by the way. Ohio State's loss to Oregon in hindsight wasn't bad, but it was perplexing given the result of the Rose Bowl. Their loss to Michigan was absolutely horrible. Same with Notre Dame's to NIU. But these two teams are different from those games. Ohio State and Notre Dame are not playing the same bad football they did in those games. Now, those games are valuable because they show the weaknesses that these two teams have. The NIU game showed that you can run on Notre Dame, and if you're consistent, that's how you move the defenses. You average 3-4 yards per carry, and Ohio State would benefit from being able to do that against Notre Dame. And the odds say they will. The odds also say that the weaknesses that Ohio State as exposed against many other teams in terms of their passing attacks because their secondary is elite, they'll be able to expose Notre Dame's weaker passing offense, and NIU is able to do that. Now, for Ohio State, their weakness is their offensive line. If you have a good defensive line and you can cover their wide receivers, which Texas did, Penn State did, Michigan did, Nebraska even did, well, they won't score more than 30. They're incapable of doing that, of scoring more than, not even 30, of scoring more than the low 20s in offensive points if you have a good D-line and a good defense overall. But I don't think, and this is probably revealing my hand a little bit early, I don't think Notre Dame can expose Ohio State's weak points as well as Ohio State can expose Notre Dame's. Ohio State, I think, is the head coaching edge and the defensive coaching edge. However, I do like Mike Denbrock over Chip Kelly, and I also think that Notre Dame's strength and conditioning is one of the best in the country. I think that shows from how they don't have the same incoming roster talent that Ohio State does or that Georgia did, and their roster talent's comparable to USC's. And they have just done such a good job every game at finding ways to win, at being tough, at being physical. I've been impressed by Ohio State's strength and conditioning this year. I think I may have rated it a bit too low entering this season, but Notre Dame's is legitimately a top 10, top 5 strength and conditioning unit. I mean, that team is physical, and they're very good at developing players. Now, again, I think I tipped my hand a little bit early in revealing that I think Ohio State's going to win the game, and I think they're going to cover. Now, will they blow Notre Dame out? I don't think so. No, because I think Notre Dame has one of the nation's best defenses. I do think that while Notre Dame might find themselves being unable to run the defense they want to all the time, I also think they'll do a better job in man coverage against some of these Ohio State receivers than people think, or at least maybe finding a way to run their defense but deceiving Will Howard, or maybe getting some pressure on him and therefore making him or forcing him to make a mistake or two. But at the end of the day, I think Ohio State's able to score in the lower, mid, upper 20s. And the thing with Ohio State is they can score that few points relative to how much talent they have on offense, and their defense will win the game for them. I mean, that's what the Texas game was. Seriously, where, Sawyer returned that. And on top of that, they have the talent to where all they need is one play to make an explosive happen. Notre Dame has that with Jeremiah Love, but as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Ohio State, I think, can do a better job of exploiting Notre Dame's weak points than Notre Dame can exploit Ohio State's, and that's why I have a confidence level of this pick of an 8 out of 10. Do not underestimate Notre Dame, though. They find ways to win. I'm 0-3 in picking them, and I can see them winning this game. I can, because I think they are one of the best teams in the country. Power ratings typically know what they're talking about this late in the year, and power ratings say that Notre Dame is as good as Texas and almost as good as Ohio State is. And I do think that Notre Dame has a better set of coaches and coordinators than Texas does. So if they coach their A game, if Notre Dame coaches their A game, they can outcoach Ohio State. So Notre Dame can win. I'm not doubting them. I'm not saying this will be a blowout, but I'm picking Ohio State to cover and win 28-17. It'll be a close game for 3 quarters, and then I think, like the Texas-Ohio State game in the 4th quarter, Ohio State just gets that one play that allows them to seal victory and hoist up their first national championship since the 2014 season. Go Buckeyes, go Notre Dame, or go Fighting Irish, rather. A little bit of a gaffe by me. And let's have a fantastic conclusion to the 2024 season. Whoa, that was incredible right there. I love talking college football. It's my passion. It's my love. It's a great joy to be able to talk about college football. And we have so many concurrent viewers in here. It's absolutely incredible. Beyond incredible. Let me read some more of the chat if you guys are into that. At least brush through it and see if there's anything I really agree with or really disagree with. I saw that it looks like Harrison Wallace might enter the transfer portal, like that Penn State's entire wide receiver room is basically entering the portal. Just seeing some people talk about that. I think moves had to be made, but I don't like the departure of Harrison Wallace. I just don't. Talking about Clemson and Tom Allen moving there, I wanted to make a video about that, but I just didn't think it was really worth it because it is just talking about one man moving to a program. I'll make a Clemson video, but it just wasn't worth it to talk about specifically Tom Allen. I think, and I might talk about this tomorrow, I think the move for Tom Allen was mutually beneficial to both Clemson and Penn State. I think Penn State can do better than Tom Allen at DC. I think if here's an opinion of mine. I think if Manny Diaz stayed as the DC of Penn State this season, they beat one of Oregon, Ohio State, or Notre Dame. In fact, I'd lean toward the fact they beat two of them. They beat two of those three teams if Manny Diaz is the DC. You know, they don't, I don't think they allow the same busts against Notre Dame that they did. And I certainly don't think Oregon, with how Ohio State performed against the Ducks in the Rose Bowl, I certainly don't think Oregon scores 45 points on them if they have Diaz as their defensive coordinator. So that's just my opinion. You can like it, you can dislike it, you can hate me or love me or change your hopes and dreams based off of that. But I think that Allen will help Clemson be more fundamentally sound. I think he'll help them do better at stopping the run because their run defense was awful for the talent they had, like atrocious. Wasn't the worst rushing defense in the world. Of course, that's not the case, but it's an underachieving unit relative to the talent they have. And at a school like Clemson, especially with all they're bringing back next year, they have to do better. That's why they fired Wes Goodwin, and I think it was a smart move to bring in Allen. But for the Nittany Lions, I think they can do better. It's just straight up. I think that they can, go out and get DeAnton Lynn or call up Phil Parker or call up Al Golden or call up Jim Knowles and make them say no. I don't think any of them would take the Penn State DC job. From what I know, they're all very content with where they are. But call them up and make them say no, because that is going to be a coveted job. Like, people will want to coach there next season. They will, because they're basically returning everyone on defense except for Jalen Reed and Abdul Carter, which are some of their better players on defense, but you have a lot of incoming talent, a lot of returning talent, and who knows? I mean, Deniden Sutton was a 5-star out of high school. Zane Durant really stepped up his game at D-tackle. Kobe King is incredible. Like, they might replace their alien players next year and create new aliens, especially with how well they're conditioned. So it's something to bring up. Thank you, chat, for bringing that up to me again. It's something that we'll probably talk about more tomorrow. So yeah, thank you. Let's talk about some other things as well. I want to discuss this because it's an interesting topic of conversation, and I see people like on both sides of the spectrum on this talk about how, Michigan is, they're still coached by basically a collection of homeless people, so no, they're not going to get better next year, even with the signing of the best quarterback out of high school. Or there's people who think, Michigan is going to be back and they're going to be a national championship contender or all these different things. And I will lay out the groundwork for you that I think that both of those opinions are a bit insane. In fact, I think the opinion that the coaching staff is going to hold this team back is more realistic, but still, it's an extreme, and I don't like choosing between two extremes, even if one at the current moment might make more sense than the other one does. I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle for Michigan, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. Oh my gosh! Again, Josh Pate has that advantage of being bald. I'm gonna have to get a haircut. Seriously, like sometimes I just want to buzz everything off, just like nothing to worry about, nothing to worry about. So, yeah, let's talk about this. Is Michigan football going to improve in 2025? Really? Like, how do we know that the Wolverines aren't just going to go 7-5 or 8-4 or 9-3 again? Because they are upgrading their roster from a blue chip ratio standard, from a high school recruiting ranking standard. But as we've talked about before, recruiting rankings matter. Talent matters. High school recruiting matters. But it's not the do or die. It's not all that matters. Seriously. We can bring up 2019 LSU or 2001 Miami or some of the Saban teams or some of the Kirby Smart teams, but mainly 01 Miami and 19 LSU because their coaches got fired shortly after they won it all. That's because they just had so much talent that they compensated for, I think, a lot of the ineptitude at the head coach position, the CEO position. But those are two successful examples. Think about all the failed examples where people have recruited at high levels over and over and over again. I mean, think about Rich Rodriguez or Brady Hoke at Michigan. They brought in like top 10 recruiting classes. Hoke even brought in a top 5 recruiting class. Where did that lead him? I shrug my shoulders because there's no answer outside of failure. Think about Will Muschamp at Florida. They had one good year where they kind of flukishly won 11 games. They got humiliated in their bowl game, and, well, he got fired shortly after. I mean, just think about all the SEC schools or some of the Big Ten schools that have recruited at a high level. And where has it brought them? Think about Clay Helton with USC. They've had a lot of NFL talent over the years, and it hasn't exactly led to much. So recruiting is just one piece of the pie. It's a part of a program's meal plan, of their nutritional tracking, of their calorie count. It's just one section, one fruit group. You have coaching. You have how good are the players actually, not just how good they are in high school, but how does that translate to college? You have potential of said players, not how they're performing in high school or performing in college, but can they reach that next level, or have they already hit their physical peak? There's a lot to talk about in regards to Michigan football in all those areas because they're losing a lot of NFL talent. They're bringing in a lot of what scouts say is future NFL talent, and they may even have a coaching change coming up as Wink Martindale is interviewing for NFL defensive coordinator spots. So before we get into this, I ask you, if you haven't already, to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and also when we might go live to cover some breaking news. I mean, let's say that Steve Sarkisian or Marcus Freeman or Ryan Day go to the NFL, like one of them, there would be a breaking live stream that night discussing that topic because that's a pretty big deal. Or let's say someone poaches a big name coordinator one way or the other. That would demand an emergency live show. You will want to hit the bell and get notified when we, well, cover things, whether it's scheduled or not scheduled, whether it's a video or a live show. So do that, subscribe, comment your thoughts down below. If you want to support the channel, there are links to that in the description or the pinned comment. The Discord server, which is free, I highly advise you join as we talk college football 24/7. And the Patreon page and the merchandise store are excellent ways to have fun and donate to the channel monthly for the Patreon page or to have your own shirt, sweater, or different things, if that's your thing. But let's talk about Michigan. And first and foremost, I want to go over people who are leaving, players who are leaving, key contributors. First and foremost, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham are gone. They will likely be first-round picks. Josiah Stewart will, I don't know where he'll be selected, where he'll be taken off the board, but he'll be a day 1 or day 2 pick in my mind. He's departing from the defensive line. 3 All-American caliber players. 3 of them gone. At DB, Will Johnson, All-American caliber player when healthy, hasn't been active for weeks, of course, due to his injury, but he'll be gone, and he'll be picked in the first round. Quentin Johnson, kind of a, good, great collegiate player, don't know how he'll work out in the NFL. He leaves, and Makari Page is gone as well from Nickelback. He's been a great safety in his career with the Michigan Wolverines. And Amir Hall, a depth piece, he's also run out of eligibility. And there are others, too, that I haven't even mentioned because they aren't key contributors. But there are some others who will transfer out, who will be maybe weeded out, encouraged to transfer or want to transfer, or maybe other depth pieces that have run out of eligibility, too. You look at the offensive side of the ball, and Michigan loses Miles Hinton, the left tackle. They lose We apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. In fact, what I'll do before we get back to that is I'm going to answer a super chat here. So, yeah. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Let me see. Well, this should be interesting. This actually relates to the topic that we're talking about. Okay. So, all right. Bryce Underwood collecting a check and transferring. We'll have to see. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're wrong. We'll have to see, though. Where do you think he'd transfer to? That's a question I have for you. Yeah, the dog decided to visit upstairs, which is particularly annoying, but it is what it is. I'll probably be living at home until... I'll probably be living at home until... Probably until I graduate. But anyway, let's get back to what we were talking about here. Again, apologies for the interruption. But on Michigan's offense, on the offensive side of the football, Miles Hinton will be gone. Josh Preeb will be gone. We already know that Tyler Morris is transferring out at wide receiver. Colston Loveland will be gone. Tight end, likely a first-round pick, if not a second-round pick. Alex Orji is gone. Jaden Denegal is gone. Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards at running back are both gone. So Michigan is losing a lot on both sides of the ball, to be frank. They are. So I understand the sentiment that some people think that, Michigan could stay the same, or maybe they'll even regress. But I also want to present the idea that Michigan has hired a better offensive coordinator. Chip Lindsey is a superior OC to Kirk Campbell. Do not get that twisted. That Wink Martindale has improved at DC as the year has gone on. But also the fact that if he leaves, Michigan, I think, would upgrade. There's just a lot of talent on that side of the ball. Michigan has shown that they are willing to hand out resources to the coaching staff. Like Wink Martindale was the highest paid or second highest paid defensive coordinator in the country this season. And I also believe that, look, on defense, Will Johnson this year struggled at times. He's a generational player, but the defense was playing without him a lot of the year, and he wasn't as good as he was last year, even when he was healthy. And I think there are players like Rod Moore, who's coming back, Zeke Berry, who has done well at corner, and Jaden McBurrows, Brandon Hillman, and Yair Hill, who I think can do well in the secondary. At linebacker, Jayshawn Barham and Ernest Hausman come back. Derek Moore returns at defensive end. Rayshawn Benny has graded out as high as Kenneth Grant has at defensive tackle. He's a redshirt junior who I think is waiting to have a breakout year. And then Cameron Brandt, TJ Guy. Michigan's defensive line did not have three of their best NFL players in the Citrus Bowl. They went up against a, yes, underperforming, but also very talented Alabama offensive line, and they owned them. Alabama couldn't run the ball. They couldn't protect Jalen Milroe. So I do think on defense, the overall NFL talent will regress, but there is a chance the unit gets better. There's also a chance the unit gets worse. It's still going to be a very talented defense and one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. You look at the offense should take a step forward with what Michigan is not just bringing in the portal and through high school, but also what they return there. I think that Benjamin Hall and Jordan Marshall will be a great duo of running backs next year. I think that at tight end, Marlon Klein, Max Bredesen, and Hogan Hansen will be very capable. Evan Link, Andrew Sprague, Giovanni El Hadi, Greg Crippen. These are key contributors who are returning on the offensive line, who I think will help the unit take a step forward next year. Michigan is bringing in talent out of high school like Andrew Babaloa. They might get Ty Haywood out of Alabama, who decommitted from there. 5-star caliber offensive tackles. They've recruited well and developed well there year over year over year. They're bringing in some key transfers on the offensive line. And at quarterback, you have Bryce Underwood, who has legs, who is a dual threat QB, who I think can manage a spread option quite well and who was very dominant in high school. So I think that Michigan's offense will look more like their 2021 and 2022 selves by virtue of having a more experienced O-line, being better at quarterback, and having a good stable of running backs with a good running back coach in Tony Alford. The question for Michigan on offense is wide receiver, because they've brought in at wide receiver Donovan McCulley from Indiana, who was injured. That's why he got buried behind the depth chart. He may actually be pretty good for Michigan next year, but he's a maybe, question mark. Michigan also brought in UMass wide receiver, their most recent addition, by the way, Anthony Simpson, who had a good year in 2023 but was injured in 2024. Michigan, to be frank, has not done a good job at wide receiver in the transfer portal. I like Brady Norton coming in on the offensive line. I do. I also like Trey Williams and Damon Payne coming in on the defensive line. Now, are those players who will be elite next year? Probably not, but depth is depth. I like Justice Haynes at running back, who will help Michigan's running back room, I think, be great again. And I think that TJ Metcalf will be beneficial at safety. But overall, there are questions for Michigan still entering the 2025 season. There's no doubt about that. They should be better in 2025. Absolutely. They have 3 to 4 contributing offensive linemen coming back. They've recruited and developed extremely well at an elite level on the defense, specifically D-line. So I think the D-line will still be a top 5-10 unit. Linebacker should be better on returning production alone. Secondary should look more like it did later in the year than earlier in the year for the Wolverines. And as for the offense, quarterback, I mean, Bryce Underwood, whether he'll be good, great, average, below average, or elite next season, is better than what Davis Warren, Alex Orji, and Jack Tuttle gave Michigan this season. But the question of who is he going to throw to outside of his tight ends without someone in the room stepping up who was recruited by Michigan, that's a big question. So for the Wolverines, I do think they'll be better. A combination of an easier schedule than this year on a way too early outlook and also roster improvements. I think they will win more than 7 games next year. I think that the expectation for Michigan should be, to be frank, is go 10-2 or go 11-1, or the season's a failure. I think anything less than 10-2 is a failed season. 9-3 isn't good enough. 8-4 isn't good enough. With Michigan right now, I think that 8-4, 9-3, 10-2 is probably that, within margin of error range that they'll go next year. Maybe 11-1, 7-5. Well, I think maybe possible. Michigan should not be that bad next year, but this isn't a national championship caliber team. It's not. This is not a team that is likely to go 12-0 or 11-1. And if they do, I think it will have more to do with the schedule than how good of a team they are. If they do, win 11, 12 games and reach Indy, or maybe if they win the Big Ten and get a high seed, I think it'll be more like the way Oregon did, where no, they weren't the best team in the country, and part of it was a variety of factors and close games breaking their way, rather than, let's say, the Michigan way in 2023, where they were just that good and that dominant, or the Ohio State way in 2019, where they were just that dominant, or even Ohio State this year, where they kind of played with their food and weren't a GOAT caliber team because of their issues, but they were still national championship caliber, units and players. I don't think that's what 2025 Michigan is going to be. So the message that I'm giving you is Michigan, yes, I believe will improve, but there is a chance they'll actually regress. And the fact that they're not a national championship caliber team yet. So those are my thoughts on Michigan football and whether they'll improve or not in 2025. Thank you for watching, and go Blue. Now, it's time to talk about Michigan State and why I am convinced that they will be better than they were this past season. Because this past season showed some bright spots, but at the end of the day, they were kind of... Is it unfair to say that they were awful at the end of the day? Like the Michigan game, that was bad. The Illinois game and Rutgers games were even worse. Purdue, I went to the Purdue game. The Purdue game for Michigan State was a near complete and utter failure and choke job, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that Purdue game was bad. That was bad. So let's talk about the Spartans here, because I like talking about Michigan State, and I hope that Michigan State is good next year. Will they be good? I don't know, but will they improve? I certainly think so. Just adjusting my chair here. Gosh, it just, yeah. One day, guys, one day, we will have like a professional grade studio. We'll have the studio that like Josh Pate and Joel Klatt have. One day. But until then, be patient. Jonathan Smith and Michigan State football barely passed their preseason win total in 2024. Their preseason win total was 4.5. Their actual win total was 5, going 5-7 and only winning 3 games in conference play, going 3-6. And they had some promising moments earlier in the year, but as the injuries piled up, and especially after that heartbreaking loss to Michigan, things went from bad or mediocre or maybe promising but still questionable to very concerning. And the blowout loss to Rutgers at home, I think, was the epitome of that. But what I do want to say is that it was year 1 for Michigan State. Mel Tucker left the cupboard bare. Mel Tucker took over a bare cupboard himself from Mark D'Antonio. Michigan State secretly probably has one of the worst rosters in the Power Four, and had that entering this season. So even an elite coaching staff, barring them bringing in a ton of great players from the Power Four level, even a great coaching staff was going to struggle in year 1. I only had Michigan State going 7-5. At one point I had them going 6-6, I think even 5-7 in my 2024 previews. And I think that the roster entering 2025 is upgrading. I think Michigan State has learned from some of their 2024 mistakes, this staff has. And overall, I think they will improve in 2025. But before we discuss why that is, and I just give you some of my thoughts, I'd like for you, if you haven't already, to hit the like button, share the video around to other college football fanatics who will love the work that I do here on College Football with Sam. Subscribe to the channel to help us to get to 30,000 subscribers, and hit the notification bell so that you get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, or any other time or day that we go live outside of those 2 slots, whether I'm covering breaking news or there's just, I have the time, so I want to talk about some additional topics. Do those things to help out the channel and also help yourselves out, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation one-on-one. And I think that is just incredible. It's awesome interacting with you all and talking about college football on here. I'm very grateful to you, the viewer, for helping to make this the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and one day the best college football channel on YouTube. If you want to support the channel or just check out any other things like following my Twitter or joining our Discord server, for example, the links to those are in the description or pinned comment. I highly advise, if not beg you, to join the Discord server. We talk college football 24/7 on there, and you will have an opportunity to talk to me on a more personal level than you could on YouTube as it relates to college football. And if you want to support the work I do here in terms of donations, the Patreon page and the merchandise store are also in the description and pinned comment. But let's talk about the Spartans here and look at what Michigan State has done. And I think there's no better way to start that off than looking at their portal class. Michigan State right now has the 22nd ranked portal class per 24/7 Sports, who I like to use. I think that they are very reliable. They're the best of the best. They scout very well. They are bringing in, this is just in order, in any order really, Connor Moore, offensive tackle out of Montana State, who Ohio State, by the way, wanted. 4-star offensive tackle, 6'5", 310, has the height and the weight of what you want for not just a Power 4 offensive tackle, but potentially an NFL offensive tackle. Really good. FCS All-American, I do believe. Michigan State got him over Ohio State, and I think a huge part of that is Michigan State is pretty good with the offensive line. Not in terms of course, this season in terms of results for 2024, but Jim Machilzek is an elite offensive line coach. Jonathan Smith and the offense and system he runs prioritizes the offensive line, and they have produced high caliber, and I mean that. They have produced high caliber offensive lineman Jonathan Smith and his staff has from his time at Oregon State in the offensive line. I really like Michigan State's strength and conditioning coach Mike McDonald as well. So I think Michigan State has a lot of things to offer, more than some might think, and I'm explaining that with Connor Moore because it is a surprise when, like, Michigan State gets a player that Ohio State wanted, that, in fact, I'd say Ohio State needed. Like, they need 4 offensive tackles and probably 1 interior player to shore up their depth and make sure that next year's O-line, no matter what, is not a disaster. So for Michigan State to land him was a pretty big deal. They're getting Evan Boyd, wide receiver from Central Michigan, Anelu Lafali, an edge from Wisconsin, Matt Golbin, an interior offensive lineman from Wake Forest, 6'4", 315, good height, good weight, did pretty well at Wake Forest. They're getting Isaiah Moa, linebacker from BYU, Rodney Bullard, a wide receiver from, I believe that's Valdosta State, Malcolm Bell, a corner from UConn, Grady Kelly, a defensive lineman from Florida State, Nijhai Burt, a corner from Eastern Illinois, Luka Vincic, an offensive lineman, 6'5", 303 from Oregon State, who's been coached by the staff previously, Elijah Tolliver, running back from Sacramento State, Joshua Eaton, a corner from Texas State, David Santiago, a linebacker from Air Force, Amari Kelly, a wide receiver from not Montana State, my apologies, Middle Tennessee State, was one of their first commits, Krishan McGray from Kent State, another wide receiver, and Caleb Carter, an interior offensive lineman from Western Carolina. They also have 13 outgoing transfers. And look, Michigan State's losing Charles Brantley to Miami. That's a painful, pretty big loss right there. Outside of that, and maybe Isaiah Johnson to North Carolina at wide receiver, I don't see many severe losses. Like, I just don't. And the fact that Michigan State's only lost 13 transfers from their current roster, I think says a lot to the staff in terms of their ability to retain their players. And I think that Michigan State does have a good culture. Now, of course, this is something that I should get used to mentioning, but roster limits from here on out are going to be 105 players. So I imagine in the spring portal window, there will be a healthy amount of trimming. And I also know that Michigan State brought in a lot of senior players with only one more year of eligibility for 2024. So they're probably losing a lot of talent already. But they bring back Nick Marsh at wide receiver. Michigan State does. And he was phenomenal. I think he has alien written over him. Now, does that mean he's going to be an alien next year or in his career? No. But he has that potential. They're bringing back Monterey Foster at wide receiver, who I really like. They're bringing back other players too in that room, but those two particular. Stanton Ramel is coming back. Ashton Lepo is returning. I don't know the status of Tanner Miller or Luke Newman. My intuition tells me that they're gone after this year, but they, I think, have some solid pieces coming in on the offensive line that we've already talked about. Jack Velling has eligibility. I think he's back. Aiden Childs is back. I know that Nate Carter's off to the NFL, and I forget whether K'Ron Lynch-Adams has any remaining eligibility or not. Just because the COVID year is still around, not everyone's used that, so there's a chance that he still has that as a redshirt. In fact, as a redshirt senior, 21, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty sure, just based off of that, unless he was a 2019 recruit, I think he may actually, have another year or not. But I don't exactly know. I know that on defense, Jalen Thompson's coming back. Alex Van Sumeren is coming back. I look at other players on defense like Chance Rucker at corner, Nikai Martinez, Malik Spencer. Michigan State has some players who are coming back that will improve next year. And yes, they're losing a lot, but this is an elite staff. I trust Jonathan Smith, Joe Rossi, and Brian Lindgren, and Mike McDonald, and the coordinators and the assistants. And Michigan State's also bringing in more transfers than are leaving. And the transfers they are bringing in on an average basis are better than the transfers that are leaving, with like maybe the sole exception of Charles Brantley, who's going to Miami, who has one of the bigger NIL budgets and one of the more desirable places to go to in all of college sports. So for Michigan State, I think that going bowling next year is a definite demand. The fans should expect that. I think that the Spartans will go bowling next year. Now, we'll have to see what that means. Like 6-6, 7-5, 8-4. Like, is 9 or 10 wins in the cards, especially since they don't play Oregon, they don't play Ohio State, and they get Penn State and Michigan at home. Who knows? But I do think Michigan State will improve next year, and I think that whether it's the numbers or whether it's the fact that it's year 2 with an elite staff, I do think that Michigan State will improve in 2025. Go green, go white. Now it's time to talk about Nebraska, but just before that, I'm going to take a little bit of a breather here. Just stretch. Because we've been on for a long time already. Let's see what we are talking about here. Connor, well, at least I picked Notre Dame to win it all. I picked them to beat Tennessee, which obviously was a bad pick. Yeah. But if Notre Dame wins it all, well, that was a good pick. It was a good pick by you. Yeah, Sean McNamara, the Boston College game was also pretty brutal indeed. That's for sure. Nebraska had to pass on both Livet and McCord this past season because of Raiola's flip. We'll find out if that was worth it probably by the end of next season, especially with Levitt, because Levitt as a like redshirt freshman has been phenomenal for Arizona State. Looks like he's going to stay as well. If he continues to have the same spark he did this year and Raiola continues his struggles, then it wasn't worth it, like straight up. And that right there is recruiting rankings for you. Like, they're important, yes, but occasionally you have a player like Levitt who wasn't as highly touted or rated as Raiola, who's just straight up better, like plainly better. It's just an example of that. But let's move on and actually talk about Dylan Raiola and talk about Nebraska and why I think they could pop in year 3 of the Matt Rule era. Like, I think that Nebraska this coming season, I'm not telling you like where I think they are in terms of whether top 25 or 20 or top 15, heck, maybe even top 10. That's because I don't know. And in fact, I highly doubt I'll put them in my preseason top 10. But they could pop. They do have that potential. So therefore, I think it is important for us to discuss that. So let's talk about Nebraska football right here. The Nebraska Cornhuskers are entering year 3 of the Matt Rule era, and it feels like it's do or die time for Matt Rule and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And you know how I know that? I know that because they fired their offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, in the middle of the year and went over and got Dana Holgorsen, and now Dana Holgorsen's been signed to a 2-year deal. I know that because Matt Rule, I think, was rightfully so at times critical, whether internally or externally, but I know my sources have told me that about the defense. He's critical about the defense throughout the year, and I think it's part of the reason Tony White may have left for Florida State. I know that this recruiting class that Nebraska is bringing in is good, and also specifically when it comes to the recruiting, the transfer portal side of the recruiting class, Nebraska would not be bringing in the amount of bodies they are or the high caliber players that they are if they were confident about the direction their program was heading towards in the 2024 preseason. You know, after every season, it's probably more frequent than that, you got to recalibrate. You know, you try something, and then whether you succeed or fail, or it's a partial failure or partial success, you look back, you look to your sides, and you recalibrate, and then you shoot straight. And I think that the approach that Nebraska had entering this year had, in hindsight, some questions and some faults. And therefore, I believe that Matt Rule is recalibrating a bit. You know, he's bringing in 16 transfers, and I don't think it's the end of it. Last year, they only brought in 9. And one of them, Mac Markway from LSU, like came in really late. So really, he only brought in 8 transfers that were going to really contribute. And at the end of the day, you know, Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nair, Dante Dowdle, Stefan Thompson, Micah Mezcua, Sierra Wright, a little bit of Bly Hill. Like, they contributed a little bit, yeah, but Mezcua didn't contribute for the entirety of the year. Stefan Thompson was more of a depth piece than anything. Dante Dowdle's transferred out to Kentucky and was a bit of a limited back in terms of skill set. And Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayor, I think, were a little bit disappointing. So now Nebraska is bringing in more bodies. They upgraded their offensive coordinator position, and it's year 3 of Matt Rule. And Matt Rule in year 3, whether it's at Temple or whether it's at Baylor, has done a pretty darn good job. So we're going to talk about all of that and more in this segment of College Football with Sam and Nebraska football. But before we go any further, if you have not already, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video around, hit the notification bell so that you get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and also when we go live at other points, other times and dates throughout the year, whether I just have additional free time from school or from life and can talk about more college football, more Nebraska football, and also, well, when there's breaking news, because breaking news happens. Maybe someone leaves for the NFL and it's totally unexpected. It's not on one of the days I'm scheduled to go live. Well, if it's enough of a event, we'll talk about it that day. So hit the notification bell if you haven't already. Comment your thoughts down below. If you want to support the work that I do here and donate, the Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or pinned comment. And I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to check out the Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 on there with over 100 members, and you'll get personal access to me to talk about college football there. So the Cornhuskers, I like their approach entering 2025. I do, because I think it's necessary. I think that you don't want the same timetable that Scott Frost had, where they ended up giving him 5 years and he never went bowling. Now, Nebraska finished 7-6. They got to a bowl game. They won their bowl game, albeit a little bit of a struggle fest in doing so. But as Corn Crazed has mentioned before, this is the last season that Nebraska should celebrate 7 wins. I mean, if Nebraska, even if they go 7-5 next year and technically improve their regular season record, there should be anger directed at the staff. There should be rage, maybe. I feel like 7-5 with next year's schedule and with Raiola being in his second year in an OC upgrade would probably be a little bit of a waste, even a wide receiver upgrade too. And we'll talk about that throughout this video. If they went 8-4, I feel like that would kind of be a little bit like, it's good progress, but we maybe could have seen more. I feel like 9-3, 10-2 for Nebraska next year is the point where you definitely say that year is a success. 8-4, I think, could be a good year. Would be Nebraska's best year since in the regular season 2016, and probably would be potentially better than that, because that 2016 Nebraska squad was pretty overrated, and the end of the year definitely showed that. Actually, they went 9-3 that year and lost their bowl game. So it would be, the best season since that, for sure, at 8-4. But all the seasons since 2016, except for this past season, 2024, have had losing records. And this past season had a push. It had a tie, had a non-winning percentage in the regular season. Not a losing season, but not a winning season either in the regular season. Only with a bowl win over a weak Boston College team did that turn into a winning season. So that's just the reality here. But the good news is these 16 incoming transfers are high-impact players in a lot of ways. Elijah Pritchett is transferring from Alabama, 6'6", 327 pounds. He's big, he's tall. He's had some inconsistency, but I think that he could do very well on a Nebraska offensive line that needs an upgrade. Hardly Gilmore, the 4th, is transferring in from Kentucky. Young player. Marquise Groves Killebrew is transferring in from Arizona at corner. Jameer Khan is a corner coming in from Southern Illinois. Marquise Watson Trent, Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year, is transferring in at linebacker, 5'11", 225. I bet you he'll be on my preseason All-Big Ten team. Andrew Marshall's transferring in at corner from Idaho. Justin Rhett is transferring in at safety from Georgia. Dasan McCullough, who did well at Indiana and also well at Oklahoma throughout his years there, he's transferring in at linebacker. Isaiah Hunter, young player, 6'2", 210, wide receiver from Cal, is transferring into Nebraska. Williams Waneri is coming in from Missouri, 5-star out of high school, 6'7", he's tall, 255 pounds, so he's the ideal build for a D-end. Kevin Gallick is transferring in at long snapper from New Hampshire. Gabe Moore's coming in at D-line from Mississippi State. Jack McAllister, punter, transferring in from Washington. Jalen George is transferring in at D-line from Eastern Tennessee or East Tennessee State. Marcos Davila is transferring in from Purdue. And Dane Key, who I think is the biggest addition in a lot of ways, wide receiver who's transferring in from Kentucky, where Nebraska's new wide receivers coach was coaching in the 2024 season. I look at Nebraska, and I got to think to myself that we've seen Matt Rule, he likes to tear everything down, kind of cut everything, to prune everything, to trim everything, and then he builds back up from there. In 2023, Nebraska had an opportunity to, at one point, actually entering the month of November, win the Big Ten West, which, yes, was a meme division. It was weak, but they had some moments that year. They scored 18 points per game, allowed 18.2. Their SRS was 60th. In 2024, they scored 23.5 points per game and allowed 19.5. Their SRS was 31st. So there is progression. And if you look at FPI or you look at S&P Plus, it's the same thing. Like, Nebraska was universally better in every way. And by every way, I just mean, in terms of talent, in terms of game-by-game performance, than they were last season. I think there were spots where parts of the defense were worse than last season. I think even parts of the rushing offense might have been better last year than this year. But I think a large part of that was the fact that Heinrich Harburg and Jeff Sims were mobile QBs, and Dylan Raiola is a statue. So unless you have a great offensive line, your rushing game is going to, I think, suffer. And even if you do, your rushing game is going to be a little bit more one-dimensional than if you had a dual-threat QB. But there has been progression. And Matt Rule, we've seen this before, and I'm going to use the Baylor example because, Power 4 school. In year one, their SRS was 96th. That was 2017. It was 53rd in 2018. They were 20th in SRS in 2019, winning 1 game in 2017, 7 games in 2018, and 11 games in 2019. 3 of their losses were to Oklahoma twice and Georgia once. Georgia was 6th in SRS that year, and Oklahoma that year was the last Lincoln Riley team to go to the college football playoff. They had an SRS of 11th. So they only lost to, top 15 teams in terms of final poll rankings, top 8 teams. So I think that we're seeing the same progression that Rule teams have showed us before, whether at Temple or at Baylor. We're seeing that here even with the portal, even with NIL, even though the game is vastly different now than it was when Rule was at Baylor. Vastly different in a lot of ways, but the game overall is still college football. You're still recruiting out of high school. The portal existed in much more limited supply, but again existed at times in the 2010s. You still have red shirts. You still have roster management. You still have, coordinators. You have assistant coaches, technically the same size, de facto same size, but de jure, maybe I'm mixing up those things. You have a much larger assistant coaching pool because analysts can now coach on field. I think that was a rule that actually benefited college football out of the recent changes. So I believe that Nebraska next year, it's do or die. If they don't linearly progress in the way that they have in the past under Rule, there needs to be major uncomfortable conversations. But I'd say right now, Nebraska could be a dangerous, and I mean dangerous, football team. So pay attention to the Nebraska Cornhuskers entering 2025. Oh, man. Wow. Okay, I'm going to get a drink of water, but then we'll be right back, and we only have just a few more topics to talk about here. So I'll see you guys very soon. Okay, we are back. We're back. And my phone is out because I actually use that to time each segment, because if it were up to me, I'd probably talk about each segment for like 20 to 60 minutes, because I like to talk about football, and there's so much to talk about, but I'm trying to limit myself to shorter segments if you guys haven't noticed. So up next on the chopping block, we're going to talk about Ohio State, and the fact is that I think they could be college football's next dynasty. But let me say hi to some of our mods here and thank them for helping out the channel. Thank you, Armand Hammer, Bad A Buckeye, Colby Vlach, and Chimichanga Guy for being moderators on the channel. I appreciate it very much. And as always, at the end of the show, we'll be discussing any super chat questions you guys have. And thank you again earlier to Chocolate Chip Scoochie for the $2, the $2 super chat. I appreciate that. So let's move on and talk about Ohio State football. Let's do that. Yeah, just gotta. It's interesting, like how maybe I'm just a perfectionist, but when my chair moves, it's a pretty annoying. But that's just like what happens when, understandably so, when Ohio State loses a game, their fan base loses it, and I get it because I'm a Michigan fan. I kind of have Ohio State level expectations for my team, which is why when 7-5 happened this year, even with the win over Ohio State, I was furious. It was just it's a massive waste of NFL talent. It really, really was. And I hope that Michigan does not have a season like that for a long, long, long time. Long time. Now, Ohio State had seasons like that for much of the 20th century. So the odds are at some point in the 21st century, they are going to have like a 7-5, 8-4 type season. Like that's very possible. Do I think it'll happen now? That's kind of the point of this video, is I think Ohio State might be too big to fail, guys. So if you aren't an Ohio State fan, this segment may not be for you, but if you are an Ohio State fan, this segment is absolutely for you. So Nick Saban retired at the conclusion of the 2023 season. And with that, people kind of had the thought process going that dynasties in college football were over, especially with the transfer portal, with name, image, and likeness deals, allowing schools with big money, whether they were name brands or not, to sign great players that previously they maybe could not have signed. But at the same time, I think that this season has shown that you can still have a team that is at least close to the caliber of previous national champions in Ohio State. Ohio State right now is the closest team to a pre-12 team college football playoff champion. They're the closest out of all the teams this year to 2023 Michigan, to 2022 Georgia, to 2021 Georgia, and some other teams that year that were great, like 2022 Michigan and Ohio State, or 2021 Alabama, or 2020 Alabama. Or, we could just go further, like 19 LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, 18 Alabama, and 18 Clemson. I could just go on and on and on. This Ohio State team is the closest to those teams. Now, would Ohio State beat most of those teams? My guess would be probably not. Would they beat some of them? I would say there's a good chance of that. But they're the best team in the country right now. And I think long term, there's a good chance they could be the best program in college football with their recruiting, with their development, with the head coach they have, who I think is a genius tactician. And that's what we're going to talk about today is, could Ohio State be the next dynasty of college football? No one will repeat a Saban dynasty. I don't think that's possible because Nick Saban's one of a kind. He's a jack of all trades, and he's also a unicorn. And I don't think any college coach right now is Nick Saban or Urban Meyer to even go that far. But I do think that Ohio State could be the best program in the country and win the most national championships over, let's say, the next 10 years or 15 years. That's looking very far ahead. But that's what we're going to talk about here. And I want you all, if you haven't already, to like the video, subscribe to the channel, to hit the notification bell, and also to comment your thoughts down below if you haven't already. And hit the bell especially because you'll get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If we go live at a different time, I will always communicate that to you guys via community notes or my Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, you can follow my Twitter/X at CFB, WSAM. The link to that's in the description or pinned comment. Same with the links to my Discord server, which is free, and join it so we can talk college football 24/7. And also, if you want to donate to the channel, the Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description and the pinned comment. But I think the only appropriate place to start off with this is Ohio State's 2025 roster. Currently, there are several players on the Ohio State roster that will not be here next season. They'll be gone. They'll be off to the NFL. They'll be playing in the pros, or maybe some of them won't. Maybe some of them will be moving onto life past football, but the majority of them will be in the pros. Those players are Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver, Donovan Jackson at tackle. Those players will be Josh Fryer, also at tackle, Seth McLaughlin and Josh Simmons, who got injured tragically this year along the offensive line. G. Scott Jr. will be gone at tight end. You look at Will Howard, he'll be gone at QB. Travion Henderson and likely Quinshon Judkins will go off. So that's a lot of players right there, a whole lot of players. 9 of them, if you count current starters, that's 7 on offense who will be leaving. But the other 2, Simmons and McLaughlin, they helped the team get to this point where they're likely going to win the national championship on Monday. You look at defense, Jack Sawyer, he's gone. Ty Hamilton, gone. Tyleik Williams, Jiki Tuimoloau, gone. Sonny Styles, probably back next season, but he could also declare for the NFL and certainly get drafted. Like, he could. He's good enough and has a whole lot of talent. But we won't count him for just the sake of the fact he has eligibility and could probably boost his stock. Cody Simon, he's gone. Denzel Burke, gone. Lathan Ransom, gone. Jordan Hancock, gone. I don't think Igbenogsun's quite as NFL ready as Styles is, just with how he's grabbing people. But that's 8 defensive starters right there. 8. Perhaps, although again, I doubt Simon goes pro, but I bet you he could if he wanted to and could get drafted. Potentially 9. I mean, Ohio State's losing a ton of talent. However, look at who they're bringing back. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, potentially 2 alien wide receivers. On the offensive line, they're returning Austin Siereveld, Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola, and Luke Montgomery. Now, I don't think interior offensive line is Ohio State's strong point, and film and Pro Football Focus grades would, along with the fact that Ohio State has 2 elite running backs, and after the injuries, they've barely averaged 4 yards per carry, would tell you that they've struggled there. But, to be fair, all those players are redshirt sophomores or younger. So, with experience, they'll get better. And it's important to have multiple players with multiple snaps return on the offensive line. That is where the injuries for Ohio State are not blessings in disguise at all. However, they did open the window for these younger players to get experience, whereas if they didn't happen, next year, the offensive line, the starters would basically be coming out and playing Power 4 football cold turkey, like against Texas, who's going to have a really good D-line and is the first game of Ohio State's 2025 season. You look at tight end, Will Kazmarek, Christian Bennett, and Jelani Thurman have been key contributors, and you also have Max Clare transferring in at tight end. So tight end room, I think, will be upgraded compared to this season. At quarterback, it's going to be a battle between Julian Sayin, Lincoln Keenholz, and probably a transfer. I imagine Julian Sayin will win that battle. At running back, C.J. Donaldson and James Peoples will be the running backs. And also on the offensive line, I don't want to forget, but Ohio State is bringing in key players there. They're bringing in Phillip Daniels, offensive tackle from Minnesota, who I think will do very well. And then also a player from the group of 5 level, who's not quite as good, or at least proven as Daniels, but still is a pretty good offensive tackle in Ethan Anainwa. So the 2 tackles that are leaving Ohio State will be replaced by incoming transfers. You look at the defensive side of the football, Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, Hero Kanu, and Kenyatta Jackson Jr. I think those players, along with Edric Houston, will be pretty good. Now, of course, when you lose 4 starters on the defensive line, you're going to see some regression. It's like with Michigan's D-line entering 2025. They lose 3. They'll still be really good. Same with Ohio State's, but there will be probably some regression, especially early in the year. At linebacker, Sonny Styles, C.J. Hicks, Arvell Reese come back, and I love James Laurinaitis. And then you look at DB, Jermaine Matthews Jr. is going to be an All-American. Caleb Downs is an All-American. Jalen McClain, Malik Harford, Bryce West, and Lorenzo Styles Jr. and Davison Igbinosun will also be back. So I think secondary will be pretty good too, especially with Downs returning. So I think that Ohio State will still be one of the best teams in the nation next year, even with all the production they have lost. And that's because they're using the portal well. They're going to have a lot of staff cohesion, a lot of continuity on their staff, and they recruit at an elite level and develop at an elite level as well at a variety of positions. So that's just the immediate future. But what about the long-term future? Well, Ryan Day's been here for quite some time. He's had many opportunities to go to the NFL. He has not. His seat is going to be totally cold if they win the national title. It'll probably still be cold just by the virtue that they reach the national championship game. Even if he loses to Notre Dame somehow, I don't expect a ton of pressure placed on him just because of what they've done in the postseason this year. It's been quite incredible. And I think that just look at their recruiting and look at who they've put in the NFL. And we talk about it in college football. It's the same. Recruiting rankings aren't everything. They aren't. But Ohio State's not one of those schools who has recruited at a high level for several years and just can't do anything with it. I mean, entering 2025, they're going to have the 3rd best recruiting class coming in with 26 total commits. So they're actually bringing in like bigger recruiting classes, which Day previously is not. You look at 2024, smaller recruiting class of 22 commits. It's 5th. You look at 2023's recruiting class, 4th with 21 commits and only 1 3-star. You look at the 2022 recruiting class. Ohio State 21 commits, only 1 3-star. The 20 were blue chip players. You look at the 2021 recruiting class, which due to redshirting, there will still be some 2021 players on the 2025 roster. 24 commits, only 2 3-stars. 21 of them were blue chip players, and 7 of them were 5-stars. Most will be off to the pros after this season, but still, this team recruits at a very high level, and they develop at a high level, and Day's a master tactician, and they have an elite DC. So my view of this with Ohio State football is they are in the best position out of everyone to win the most national championships and have the most postseason success because of the current coaching staff they have, because of the fact that Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles, I don't think they're interested in head coaching jobs, at least right now. Ohio State has a lot of players or former players like, let's say, James Laurinaitis, who I think will want to be at Ohio State for years. Same with Brian Hartline, who are also elite. So they're not just, buddy system hires. They're like legitimate meritocratic hires that benefit the university. That's a good system to have right there. And then by virtue of how they're recruiting and the fact that they're in the Big Ten, who the top Big Ten teams for 2 years in a row have been the best teams in the country. And the Big Ten, just to be frank, is not as tough as the SEC. So you're not getting worn down like Georgia. Georgia's roster this year was a lot better than people will remember it for, but the tough teams they played this year kind of broke the roster because their schedule was that tough. And of course they had some, injury luck that didn't go their way. But there's a lot I think that benefits Ohio State moving forward. I do think that in the past I've been a Ryan Day defender most of the time. I questioned him a little bit after the Michigan game, and I think that was justifiable. But this is why. Ohio State's losses, I've said this time and time and time again, and people complained or like, well, he hasn't beaten the big teams. It's like, well, look, if he wins the national championship, his postseason will be just as successful, if not more successful, than Urban Meyer's was. And the postseason's what matters the most anyway. Winning the national championship, how you finish the year, how you launch yourself into the future. This is why, because Day has recruited at a high level. He's developed at a high level. He's schemed at a high level. His only issue was Michigan. And with Urban Meyer, his only issue was he couldn't get out of his own way against the opponents that in the immediate term seemingly didn't matter, but in the long term held them back from postseason success. I think Ohio State right now is an elite program. They might be the best program, in my opinion, after this year, depending on what happens in the preseason and also in the national championship game. I really like where Ohio State's heading, and I think there's a good chance that they could be the next top-tier dynasty of college football. Maybe there won't be any dynasties in the next decade or so of college football. It'll just be teams trading back and forth. But if there is a team who can be the next dynasty in football, I really like Ohio State's chances. There are teams like, Texas who could be that. If Notre Dame wins it this year, who's to say they can't, with the fact that they're going to recruit at a high level? And there are other schools who can compete for that. But I think Ohio State's in the best position to be the next college football dynasty, if there is one. So go Buckeyes. The national championship games would be interesting, but even if the result does not go the way that Buckeye Nation wants it to go, I think there's still a lot of optimism for the future of Ohio State football. And now, let's talk about two teams who I think could be favorites to win it all next year, depending on what your perspective is. Of course, by odds, there can only be one favorite. There's only one consensus favorite. But I do think these teams have an argument to be the best teams in the country next year. So let's talk about, first and foremost, Miami football. Should the Miami Hurricanes be favored to win it all in 2025? Or should at least they should be... Gosh, I messed up there. Should the Miami Hurricanes be favored to win the ACC championship in 2025? Should they even be favored to win it all in 2025, or at least one of the favorites to win it all? I know that Cam Ward is gone and Xavier Restrepo is gone, and a loaded roster on defense primarily was wasted by incompetent coaching. However, what I will say is that they've recruited and developed at a high level at multiple positions. They've upgraded their defensive coaching staff. They play in the ACC, so strength of schedule is a benefit to them in the way that they're not constantly facing loaded rosters, so you aren't going to see as many snaps from your starters, assuming that Miami isn't going to play in a bunch of close games. And also, they're not going to be facing a bunch of NFL players week over week over week, so they're not going to be beaten up as much. And they do have talented players coming in through the transfer portal. And again, as we've already talked about, bringing in Corey Heatherman was a massive coaching upgrade at defensive coordinator. So I want to discuss Miami football and the Hurricanes today, because I do think even with Mario Cristobal, who isn't a good game manager, that they have an opportunity to pop in 2025. And I think that starts on the defensive line. I think that starts on the offensive line, the lines of scrimmage. I think that starts with Carson Beck, the new quarterback of the future. I think that starts with their running back room, which is very talented. And I also think it starts at wide receiver, where they won't reload, but I think they'll do better than maybe some people expect them to. So let's talk about this. And before we do, I ask you to just like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. We usually talk about Big Ten football on College Football with Sam, but the channel is named College Football with Sam because I like to talk about all things college football. So I'd really appreciate it if you're a Miami fan to like the video, sub to the channel, and also click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern time, or any other time we go live, or any other day. You'll get notified if you hit the notification bell. And also, if you want to support the work that I do here, please visit the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. You can donate via my Patreon page monthly, purchase merchandise via my merchandise store, and represent the channel. And also, there's a link to my Discord server, which I highly advise you to join. Again, the link to that's in the description or pinned comment. Miami, I think, is an interesting case study, because they're the only team that throughout the past several years, whether it's 2021, where they, had the 11th best recruiting class, whether it is 2022, where that recruiting class finished 16th, that was the recruiting class where Manny Diaz was fired. He was recruiting that class, got canned. Cristobal came in. They still finished top 20. Whether it is 2023, they were 7th in recruiting. Whether it's 2024, where they finished 4th in recruiting, or whether it is this recruiting class, 2025, they finished 14th. They're the only non-Big Ten, non-SEC school outside of Notre Dame to, in 2025 and 2024, not 2024, but in 2025, to finish in the top 15. In 2024, they were the only non-SEC and Big Ten program to finish top 10 in recruiting outside of Notre Dame, only one to finish top 5. In 2023, Miami was the only non-Big Ten, non-SEC program to finish top 10 in recruiting. So they are the best non-Big Ten SEC school in terms of high school roster talent. And Aaron Feld's an elite strength and conditioning coach. Alex Miraball's an elite offensive line coach. Their wide receivers coach does a great job there. I think that they have good coaches all around at the assistant level. And now they have a great defensive coordinator in Corey Heatherman, tied with a great offensive coordinator in Shannon Dawson. So with coaches like Mario Cristobal, you can win big with them. I mean, we've seen Miami before win with like Larry Coker, who kind of looks like Darth Sidious, if I can say that comment and be respectful, but he literally does. And on top of that, he just wasn't a good coach. You know, they won 10 games with Mark Richt, who at that point in his career was definitely on the decline. And then we've, seen LSU win a national championship with Ed Orgeron. And I think Mario Cristobal is a better head coach than Ed Orgeron, better head coach than Larry Coker. However, in order to do that, you have to have a lot of talent and you have to have elite coaches. I think Miami has the talent to win at the highest level. I think now they have better coaches to win at the highest level than they did entering 2023 with Corey Heatherman. But the question is, do they have, they have some of the best development? Do they have, some lightning in a bottle that, let's say, 2019 LSU had a bit? And has Miami developed and recruited and coached at a high enough level year over year over year to where they're stacking great seasons on top of each other? I don't know the answer to that, but I want to talk about Corey Heatherman and what his defense did in 2024. And then I want to talk about Miami's incoming transfer class a little bit and also what they should be returning entering 2025. And of course, this is very early. Not every person has transferred out that will transfer. Not everyone has announced that they're coming back that could announce they're going to leave. But still, I think it's healthy to look at this from an early view. But first and foremost, I want to look again at Corey Heatherman and the body of work that he has done. So on defense this season, Minnesota defensively was 10th in opponent points per game, allowing 18.3. They were 12th in opponent points per play, allowing 0.288. They were 17th in opponent yards per point. Opponents had to gain 16.3 yards to score a single point on the Golden Gophers. They were 12th in opponent offensive touchdowns per game, only allowing 2.1. And Minnesota, they were 6th in total defense, only allowing 298.3 opponent yards per game, and they only allowed 4.7 opponent yards per play. Now, to be fair, Minnesota did not exactly face a Titan group of offenses. They did not. For example, they kicked off the year playing like North Carolina, for example. Not a really good team. They played Rhode Island. They played Nevada. They allowed 31 points to Iowa. I mean, Minnesota this year had problems stopping the run. That got solved as the year went on. Like, they did a pretty good job against Wisconsin and Penn State, Virginia Tech, and Rutgers at limiting the ground game. But early in the year, they were pretty bad at stopping the run. They allowed 27 points to Michigan, 17 to USC, which was impressive. They escaped to UCLA, which a lot of teams didn't on the road, in huge part because of their defense. They held Illinois to 17. They held Penn State to 26, which Penn State finished the year, I think, with a top 10 offense, top 5 offense in terms of success rate that, scored points on Notre Dame's great defense, could have scored more on Ohio State's defense, scored in the 30s on Oregon's defense. And look, I think next year's going to be a really good unit. But they didn't face Ohio State. They didn't play that caliber of offense. They didn't play a Miami caliber of offense, for example. But still, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of talent year over year when you look at high school recruiting rankings and talent of high school, but they do a really good job of developing. And Corey Heatherman's defense, they were 9th, 10th in opponent points per game this past season. Last season, in 2023, they were 70th. And they changed DCs straight up. So when I look at Minnesota and the job they did this year, I think that hiring a Big Ten defensive coordinator, and hopefully Miami allows him to change some things as he sees fit with the defensive assistants, I think that's a major upgrade. And I think that will be a big part of the reason why Miami, even with all their losses on offense, should be a much better team next year. I don't think Miami will have an LSU type year, in part because their schedule and they don't play in as tough of a conference, but also what they've done in the portal and how they've been hitting in the portal and some players they are bringing back, like Francis Mauigoa at right tackle, Matthew McCoy at left guard, Inez Cooper at right guard. I don't know if Jalen Rivers is off to the NFL or not, but he has eligibility at left tackle, and they've recruited very well. I mean, Samson Okunlola, for example, at right tackle. And they just, on the offensive line, Mirabal does a really good job recruiting and developing. At receiver, I know that they are bringing in C.J. Daniels from LSU. I think Sam Brown Jr. might be back. Don't know about that exactly. Elijah Arroyo, I think, will be back. Cam Ward's gone, obviously, but Carson Beck, I think, will do a better job at Miami than he did at Georgia. He'll have better receivers than he did at Georgia, so he'll be closer, I think, to his 2023 self than his 2024 self. I don't know if Damian Martinez is off to the NFL or not, but I know Mark Fletcher Jr. is back, and he was a pretty good back, and Jordan Lyle was talented off high school. You look on defense, I think that they lose a lot. I think that Tyler Barron, Elijah Alston, and Simeon Barrow Jr. were not utilized properly this year. Same with C.J. Clark, but Ruben Bain Jr. is back. He was really good as a freshman, good again as a sophomore. Ahmed Moten Sr. is back. I see that Akeem Mesidor has eligibility, but maybe he declared for the NFL or not. You look at linebacker, Wesley Bisanthe is returning, and in the secondary, Zaquan Patterson, Markeith Williams, O.J. Frederick, and a lot of players there are going to come back, but also a lot of transfers are leaving. That's why Miami, for example, is bringing in Charles Brantley from Michigan State, who is a wonderful corner when he was healthy. That's why they're bringing in Zechariah Poyser from Jacksonville State, David Blay on the interior from Louisiana Tech, Emmanuel Carnley from Arizona at corner, Ethan O'Connor at corner. Again, we already mentioned C.J. Daniels, wide receiver from LSU. They're also bringing in Alex Bauman and Jack Nickel at tight end from Tulane and UAB, and James Brockermeyer at center to replace the outgoing Zach Carpenter. So this team entering 2025, I think, is going to improve in a variety of areas. Now, offensively, they will regress. I don't know if Miami will reach the college football playoff like they failed to do this year, and I thought it was going to be pretty easy for them to do with their schedule. They play Notre Dame opening week of the 2025 season. I think that makes their schedule, along with playing Florida again, tougher alone than it was this season. But maybe they'll be a better team than they were this season. We'll just have to see with Miami and Mario Cristobal where they go. Go Hurricanes. I am not someone who hates Miami, so I'm hoping that this team ultimately succeeds. And then last but not least, we'll talk about Penn State. And then I have to eat because I am starving. Okay, so let's talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions here. Should Penn State be the favorite to win the national championship and also the favorite to win the Big Ten? Now, given James Franklin's reputation, I think that question is understandably approached with severe caution. But think about it this way. Penn State is bringing back a mammoth of talent. Yes, they lose Abdul Carter and they lose Tyler Warren. But let me tell you the players who they are returning so far, not including, Harrison Wallace III and Amari Evans who entered the portal. I really didn't like the fact that Harrison Wallace III entered the portal. Thought he was going to have a big year next year, but maybe he'll come back. Maybe he's just testing the market. Who knows? They're returning on offense. Liam Clifford, Drew Shelton, Olivega Ione, Nick Dawkins, Anthony Donko, Khalil Dinkins, who played at tight end significantly, although he wasn't a starter, Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, and Katron Allen. They're turning a lot of players on offense. On defense, they're bringing back Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant. They're bringing back Tony Roas. They're bringing back Kobe King. They're returning A.J. Harris, Zion Tracy, Zakee Wheatley, and then they're bringing back Smith Vilbert. I think they're bringing back Amin Vanover and Keziah Izzard, and just so many different players on defense, offense. Riley Thompson will be back at punter, and Ryan Barker will be back at kicker. Penn State's in a prime position to finally take that next step forward under Franklin that they have been waiting to do so for so long. So we're going to be talking about the Nittany Lions here, but let's talk about before we do so, before we talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions, I encourage you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel, to hit the notification bell, to like the video, and to comment your thoughts down below. I mean, do you think that Penn State can win it all in 2025? Or maybe the question should be phrased, will they win it all in 2025? What do you think? I want to hear your thoughts, so list them below. If you want to support the channel, the links to the Patreon page and merchandise store in the description or pinned comment. And I highly encourage you to join our Discord server if you haven't already, where we talk college football 24/7. With Penn State, though, getting back on topic, they're upgrading their roster, they're upgrading their staff, and they're upgrading their roster because they're returning a lot. They've consistently recruited at a good level. More so, I think the biggest thing with Penn State is Chuck Losey is an elite strength and conditioning coach. Dion Barnes and Phil Trotween have been wonderful coaches on the lines of scrimmage. Ty Howell has done a phenomenal job developing tight ends and stacking tight ends. And you look at, on the defensive side of the ball, I think Terry Smith's done a good job at DB. And Kotelnicki has revolutionized this offense. I mean, Penn State had no great receivers. Harrison Wallace was the only wide receiver who I thought was just good. But Liam Clifford, Amari Evans, and then Julian Fleming, and so many of these other receivers that we could mention, I think the room needed a full-on reset, if I'm being honest. It suffered from poor coaching year over year over year. And I think that they just needed a straight-up reset right there. So even with the losses there, look, Penn State's bringing in transfers at wide receiver that I think will be better than what we saw in 2024. For example, they're bringing in Devontae Ross from Troy, and they're bringing in Kyron Hudson from USC. Now, Kyron Hudson has a very high ceiling, and I think he'll be wide receiver 1 for the Nittany Lions this coming season. He had 462 receiving yards on 38 receptions for 3 touchdowns, 12.2 yards per reception. His biggest game of the season was against LSU to kick off the year with 83 receiving yards, including an amazing one-handed catch and 5 receptions. And then Devontae Ross from Troy is a receiver that many other Power 4 programs could have gone after. He had 1,043 receiving yards, 11 receiving touchdowns, 13.7 yards per reception on 76 receptions. He had 142 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns against Iowa. He cooked Iowa's secondary. Now, Iowa's secondary this season was not the same as in previous seasons, but it was still a really good secondary full of NFL talent. So I believe that at the end of the day, Penn State, whether it's addition by subtraction, whether the receiver room is actually thinner than it was this year in terms of number of names, but it's better in terms of quality, or whether they have better depth and they're just better in every single way, in both just number of names there, or number of names there means like how many players are in the wide receiver room, so quantity. They're better in quantity and quality. I think regardless, they'll be better at the starting positions in 2025. Aller will be in another year under the Kotelnicki system. Same with the entire offense. The offensive line at the end of the year, I think, was the best O-line in the country for Penn State, especially in run blocking. Pass blocking they can improve upon, but it's good that Anthony Dunco, Nolan Rucci, Andrew Shelton all look like they're going to come back. Like, that's really good for what should be one of the best offensive tackle units in the country. And Nick Dawkins and Olavega Ione coming back, along with Dominic Rulli and freshman Cooper Cousins, who will be in another year with the program, that'll be a phenomenal offensive line next year. This year, Franklin had the best offensive line of his Penn State tenure. I think it'll be surpassed by the O-line this coming season. And on defense, look, Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant returning is huge. Same with a lot of depth players that I didn't think had eligibility, but evidently they do. Both linebackers will be back, including Dominic DeLuca. And then in the secondary room, I'd imagine whoever Penn State hires next at defensive coordinator, whether they promote Anthony Poindexter from within or go out and make an external hire, I imagine the DBs will benefit from the new hiring. I do. I think that Tom Allen going to Clemson was mutually beneficial for both parties, for both the Tigers, who needed a new and better defensive coordinator than Wes Goodwin, and I think Tom Allen was that, and for the Nittany Lions, who have a lot of NFL talent on defense. Like Roas is a future pro, Kobe King is a future pro, Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant are future pros. You look at A.J. Harris, future pro. I think that Zakee Wheatley is a future pro. And there are others in the weeds who are younger players who just haven't emerged yet who I think could be future pros. I think that's a coveted defensive coordinator job. We've seen Manny Diaz take it before. Brent Pry was an elite DC at Penn State for many years under Franklin. And Tom Allen this year, I think, boosted his resume enough to where he could go to Clemson and get paid nearly $2 million a year. So Penn State, I think, could hire just about anyone at defensive coordinator. And some of the names would surprise me, but the more I would think about those names, if Penn State, let's say poached a DC from a similar blue blood caliber program or even from, a national championship caliber team, the more I think about it, it wouldn't totally surprise me. I think Penn State's going to upgrade a defensive coordinator. Their coaching staff is one of the best of the best. Franklin at this point's the only thing holding Penn State back. It's why they didn't win big games this year. They had questionable management against Oregon, some questionable penalties that just circle back to the head coach and discipline. Same thing against Ohio State. Notre Dame, I think, was more of just the limitations in the passing offense. I didn't see the same terrible play calls in my mind against Notre Dame or the same stupid penalties, but they did have coverage breakdowns, and they weren't the most disciplined team in that game either. So I think Franklin also has to do some soul searching, look in the mirror, and improve in a variety of areas. But this team should be better in 2025 and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it will be better in 2025 than it was in 2024. They are losing their alien players. That's an area to pay attention to. Like Abdul Carter is gone. Tyler Warren is gone. So I'm curious if a player like Nicholas Singleton or Dennis Sutton or A.J. Harris can step in to an alien role. Maybe all three of them, but more likely just one of them. Maybe none of them do. But I'm curious to see, because these national championship caliber teams have alien players. I mean, think about Ohio State this year, or even Notre Dame. Notre Dame is Xavier Watts, and Jeremiah Love's an alien when healthy. Ohio State has potentially Jack Sawyer, but definitely Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. Michigan in 2023 had Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson as aliens, all on defense. And depending on who you ask, maybe Colston Loveland. 2022 Georgia had Jalen Carter and Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey with how he's playing in the NFL. He might have been an alien in college. And then in 2021, they had a ton of players like Brock Bowers his true freshman year. They had a ton of athletes everywhere. They had a Marius Mims, I think, in 22 and 21, who was an elite offensive tackle. And then they had Jordan Davis. And then on top of that, they had, I forget who else was in that room. I know they had Jalen Carter. But anyway, not to get too ahead of myself, the national champions typically have like 2 alien players or more. Who can step up and replace Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren in that regard is a question that will be answered in 2025, but I'm curious and want to know who will do that right now. Go Nittany Lions, and I think that Penn State's going to have their best year under Franklin in his career. And that's it. That's straight up the show right there, guys. That's it. So I'm going to get off. I'm going to eat. These videos will be released throughout some of them tonight. Like I'm going to release the preview for the national championship tonight, probably the Nebraska video tonight as well. And then the others will be released tomorrow, Thursday. There will be a live show tomorrow. Probably be focused around the national championship for the most part. Probably will be shorter than this one was, but there will be a live stream tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I also want to thank Chris Lane for the $2 super chat. Thank you very much for sending that in. If you guys have any questions or any super chats, now's the time to send them in because I'm going to be getting off here very, very shortly. But let me just get the pop-out chat going here, and we'll see what he said. I saw that he said go Buckeyes. Chris Lane did. So Chris Lane says 1 game left, go Buckeyes. 1 game indeed is what's left. And go Buckeyes. OHIO. Thank you for the $2 super chat, Chris Lane. I have never placed a sports bet in my life. I would comfortably put a significant amount on Penn State not winning the Big Ten or the national championship next year. You know what? I am not going to call that a bad bet at all. Not going to, because Penn State should have won one of the Big Ten or at least reached the national championship game next season. It's like, I like how the extra yard put it. James Franklin is always the other team's MVP. It's true. He is. So, well, also, speaking of which, because I see all of you talking about Penn State's defensive coordinator position, we'll be talking about that tomorrow. Like, I'll be giving you names if a hire isn't made by then. I'll be giving you 5 names, maybe even like more than 5 names. We'll be specifically zoning in on 5 names for Penn State's DC job. What does Michigan State look like next year? We talked about it in the show, the extra yard, but I do think they'll look like a 7-8 win team next year is kind of what I'm thinking. Maybe it'll be less than that, but I do have faith in the staff. And I do think that they've upgraded their roster just based off of what they got in the portal. Like that offensive tackle from Montana State, that was a huge addition because Ohio State wanted him, and he probably would have started for Ohio State next year at OT, and Michigan State got him. Like he's going to be an all Big Ten caliber offensive tackle, and they need that with Childs to protect him and help him get the ball to his receivers. All right, guys. I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night. Bye-bye.